I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless and at the end of my supply of the drug, which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall end my life. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell victim to the German sea raider. I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and other less describable things. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime, yet the very completeness of the stillness oppressed me with nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which for innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under watery depths. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search for the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. All day I forged steadily westwards, guided by a faraway hummock, which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night. I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses of the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering down over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse, which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed widely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. Dazed and frightened, I examined my surroundings more closely. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books. Several characters obviously represented marine things, which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the water on account of the enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men. Of the faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing, whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast and loathsome, it darted like a monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought there by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much. Of any upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient legend of Dagon, the fish god. But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night especially when the moon is gibbous, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information, or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself, if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat. This I ask myself. But ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling on its slimy bed, worshipping the ancient stone idols and carving their likenesses on submarine obelisks. I dream of a day when they may rise to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I can hear a noise at the door, as of some immense, slithering body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God! That hand! The window! The window!